Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here with another Warhammer Total War online commentary. In this particular ladder battle, I will be piloting the Greenskins, led by an Orc Warboss, and I'm going to be facing off against a Dwarvish opponent. So this is definitely a fun matchup, and you guys will see why here in a minute. So as far as my army composition goes, I have a front line of Doomdiver catapults. I think I may have gone a little overboard with the Doomdivers this game. I actually got 4 groups just because I feel they're so effective against the Dwarves. Because the Dwarves are a fairly slow faction. They don't have any cavalry units or anyone that's really that fast other than Slayers. So again, I feel like siege units are very, very good against the Dwarves. And, you know, unfortunately for the Dwarves, I feel like their artillery aren't as good as they should be. Doomdiver catapults are really accurate, fairly cost-effective, and usually just reap great rewards in this matchup for me. So I brought 4 groups of Doomdiver catapults. So as far as my infantry and core army goes, I have a front line of goblins here. They're shielded, and just like in the Empire matchup, goblins are a very, very good fodder unit against the dwarves. They're expendable, shielded, so they can take quarreler fire. I mean, you know, they'll still take a lot of damage, but regardless, they do have some innate defenses against missile fire. In the back line, I have black orcs. You know, the dwarves are a very resilient faction or race. So again, you do need some shock infantry like these black orcs to really crack their front line of longbeards and other units like that. And again, they have 110 armor, very, very high leadership for greenskin units, and also pretty good combat stats with armor piercing capabilities. As far as leadership, I have an orc warboss with the potions. I have a goblin big boss. I really, really like him. He's extremely fast at 94 speed. You can really take advantage of how slow the dwarves are, and he is very good at intercepting, you know, groups, locking down, you know, if they're trying to flank you, for example, he can react accordingly and really lock down an entire group of infantry, considering he can carry 2 potions. And he's also quite good at getting back into the siege line and other things like that. In the wings, I have 2 groups of Goblin Wolf Riders. I was kind of bummed because I didn't look at the map before I picked them, and there's not really anywhere to Vanguard deploy them on this map. So that's something to consider, guys, before picking your Vanguard deployment units. Make sure that the map has some foliage that can accommodate that. Regardless, my opponent's army composition, he has two groups of cannons here. Or is that just one group? Yeah, he has cannons in the front line. He has thunderers here, and he also brought a master engineer. Personally, I'm not a fan of the master engineer. I haven't had a lot of success with it. And again, I think if he maybe had, you know, another cannon, it might have justified it. But regardless, I don't think the ballistics calibration is going to be that good this game. But again, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on successes you've had with the Master Engineer. Something to consider is he does have really high missile damage. So if there's like a really pertinent, you know, general or lord that is flying, he's pretty good at taking them out. It kind of serves as a sniper in a way. In his secondary line, he has 3 groups of longbeards, a group of hammers back here. So these are his shock troops, and he'll probably be using these to combat the black orcs. And they'll do quite well with that really, really high weapon damage and extremely high melee attack. Quite a bit higher than the black orcs, actually. Then in the back, he has a group of miners. He probably just had some extra resources to spend and decided to invest in them. Then he has 2 groups of slayers, which I definitely approve of. Unfortunately for him, there's not really any good targets for the slayers here, to be honest. So it's definitely going to be a rough matchup for him in that regard. And then in terms of leadership, he has a runesmith and he has Thorgrim Grudgebearer. So between the 2 of them, you can look at his dwarvish stats as I highlight them. Look how high the leadership is on those guys, as well as the melee attack and weapon strength. So that double buff synergy is actually really, really good. Personally, I like Ungrim just not only because of thematics, and man, you can see the dwarves are already getting bombarded here, but you know, it's just my opinion. I'm a big fan of Ungrim, and the fact that he can't route has actually won me a lot of close battles. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this battle started. So as you guys can see, you know, the dwarves, like I was saying, aren't the most mobile faction, so my Doomdivers are already just absolutely decimating them and are tearing into these ranks. So I like to target Thunders and other targets like that, because once the battle gets close, sometimes I forget to switch the targeting, and if you start them off on Thunders, they'll usually just continue to shoot them the entire game. So, and one problem as the dwarves, if your opponent has an artillery or siege advantage like this, you have to advance. So that ultimately, at the end of the day, unless you want to leave troops back, makes your artillery subject to flanking and, you know, all types of things like that. So as you can see, at that same time, I'm already deploying my Goblin Wolf Riders out here and my other group here. So they're basically just like vultures waiting to pick this cannon clean. So my opponent notices this, and he leaves a group of Slayers back here, which is definitely a good play in my opinion. Regardless, the Warboss is here, and the Warboss with these Goblin Wolf Riders is going to be able to do some really good damage to these Slayers, especially with the potions. So you guys can see, these Doomdivers are just absolutely wreaking havoc on these poor dwarves here. Some of these groups have already taken heavy losses, and you know, it's definitely a rough situation for them. This group of Thunderers over here is pretty much, you know, almost decimated, and these other groups are starting to take some serious frontal shots, so definitely not ideal. He does get his Thunderers in range with this Master Engineer, and I believe he will be using ballistic calibration here, and he's starting to take some pot shots into my Black Orcs, and his cannon is returning fire as best it can. But regardless, my Doom Diver catapults, I mean, there are 4 of them, so it's a big investment on my part, so they better pay off. But regardless, they are doing good damage, and now his hammers are taking serious damage as well, and I do see that his thunders are starting to shoot at me, so I begin to start targeting them with the Doom Diver catapults to really shut them down. So in the back here, I did want to take out his cannon, so I pull in the Orc Warboss with the Wah, which gives all of these Goblin Wolf Riders 78 melee attack, which is enough to really cut through these Slayers, to be honest. And now these Slayers are getting outvalued by these 350 resource Goblin Wolf Riders. The one advantage they have is they won't rout, of course, but once he pulls in the other group, I pull back the Warboss as well as the Goblins, and you can see the Cannoneers took some serious losses as well as those Slayers. So definitely a good situation for me. So my opponent continues to shoot here, and I noticed that he kind of like was doing some sort of an overload, so he pulled all his troops over here and was going to try and overload this flank. So I send my Goblin Big Boss over here with his potions, and he's just going to start tearing into these troops, and I get a nice little charge there and take out a few Thunderers, disrupt their missile fire. So I was very happy about that, and I immediately shift my army over to match his, because I didn't want him to be able to overload my flank. And of course, this entire time, my Doom Divers are still continuing to shoot. So one good thing about this Wolf Rider harass against the Dwarves is now he kind of has his army split here, and these Goblin Wolf Riders can just do laps in between his 2 groups and can just really run down his missile units. So essentially the overarching theme of the strategy is force the Dwarves in, so then their army is going to be separated from their siege, harass the back line, then pull the Goblin Wolf Riders back and forth from the back to the front and really get some good value. And of course, the Dwarfs do have a bit of trouble dealing with flying leadership units like this. They can't really lock them down, and again, most of his Thunders were allocated to the front line, which are now just getting run over by Goblins. So as far as the front line goes, he does have Thorgrim as well as his Runesmith engaged with most of my troops. So these Black Orcs with Ere We Go will actually be able to beat these Hammerers, in my opinion, with that particular buff. So you can see the Hammerers are taking some decent losses, but so are these Black Orcs, so it's a pretty even battle there. Goblins have engaged in the front line against Thorgrim and these Longbeards, and they do have the Ruin, and these Goblins are definitely going to go down. But regardless, they're holding the line quite long against his leadership as well as Longbeards. Right here, these Black Orcs are doing quite well against Longbeards. Again, that's a good matchup for them. They have armor piercing and other abilities like that, so it's going to be definitely a good situation. And over here, these Goblins are actually doing really well against these Miners. I was very happy with that, and they did get the Wah, which buffed them quite a bit. Unfortunately for my opponent, these Doom Divers are still just shooting and getting so much value, teeing off with these Slayers, and unfortunately there are some collateral fire here with my Black Orcs, but regardless, that was okay. And you can see most of his Thunders at this point had been devastated, and though he did chase off my Goblin Wolf Riders, they still paid more than enough. They did a great job, so I was very pleased with that situation. Over here, I noticed my Black Orcs were able to overpower these Hammerers, so I saw that his General, Thorgrim, was left alone, so I pulled my War Boss and my Big Boss, as well as some of these Black Orcs with the Fists of Gork to deal with him. And unfortunately, unlike Ungrim, he's not quite as resilient in melee, and he will get taken down fairly quickly, though the Runesmith does come over to try and help him. Regardless, even that, though he is down, the Dwarves have a very high leadership across the board, so unlike most factions, they won't rout immediately. My opponent did get some Longbeards back here to finally shut down one of these groups here, but regardless, my Goblin Wolf Riders, who the remaining ones were able to come and support them, and they're really going to get bogged down here. Because Longbeards don't necessarily have enough raw combat stats to cut through fodder units very well. They'll hold the line forever, but in this particular situation, I think he should have just abandoned his artillery and then sent the Slayers back here to clean these guys up, because these guys were just shooting the entire game and just getting a ton of kills. So now my leadership as well as the Black Orcs are taking out this Runesmith, and most of my opponent's line had been crumbled by the Black Orcs, but really at the end of the day, most of the detriment to his army had come from these Doom Diver catapults. They just did so much damage to him. They forced him out of his shell, and then my Goblin Wolf Riders were able to just overpower his artillery and then take out his Thunderers. So it was definitely a tough game for my opponent, but it just goes to show how truly strong those Doom Diver catapults are. In my opinion, they're one of the best tools that you can have against the Dwarves. So as far as the army breakdown goes, the Goblins, this group of Goblin got 69 kills, which is quite impressive against the Dwarves, though they were fighting Miners, so I guess that's not as accurate of a representation. Black Orcs did pretty well for themselves. Goblin Wolf Riders, of course, you guys saw what they did. And these Doom Diver catapults, that is a lot of kills against the Dwarven army. They're pretty high tier infantry, and the fact that all these Thunders basically just got decimated by these, and all I really took losses in was this one group. So, and again, personally, the Dwarvish artillery, I don't really like it against Greenskins. I probably would have rather, invested in, another line of infantry or some Quarrelers that would have actually been pretty good as well. But regardless, it's definitely a good game. Appreciate it and look forward to seeing you again on Ladder. And any feedback you guys got, I'd love to hear in the comment section below. And thanks again for your support, guys. Have an excellent night.